The door to death row closed with a deep metal sound that echoed down the hallway. Everyone stopped talking. A guard checked his watch. Another guard stood still, eyes forward. The air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on everyone at once. Inside one of the cells, a man sat on his bunk with his hands resting on his knees. He did not shout. He did not cry. He just stared at the wall. This was San Quentin State Prison. This was death row. And tonight, someone was not coming back. Long before that moment, before the quiet hallway and the locked doors, San Quentin stood on the edge of the water like it always had. Gray walls, guard towers, razor wire cutting across the sky. People drove past it every day and tried not to look. Inside, time moved differently. My name is Daniel Moore. I worked as a clerk inside the prison. I didn't wear a badge or carry keys. My job was paperwork, files, lists, numbers. But even paperwork feels different when you're surrounded by men who may never leave. That was my low moment, realizing where I worked. San Quentin is old, older than most prisons. The floors creak. The walls remember things. Every sound carries. When I first walked into death row, a guard told me, "Don't get used to it." I asked why. He said, "Because you shouldn't." Death row was a long hallway of small cells. Each cell held one man. Some talked all day. Some never spoke. Some stared out through the bars like they were looking for something that wasn't there. One of those men was Thomas Reed. Thomas had been on death row for over 20 years. He was quiet. He read books. He said thank you to guards who ignored him. People forget this part. But death row isn't fast. It's waiting. That's the low part. The slow part. Days turned into months. Months into years. Appeals were filed. Dates were moved. Executions were stopped, then started, then stopped again. Thomas used to tell me, "The worst part isn't dying. It's not knowing when." I didn't know what to say to that. Then one morning, the routine changed. Extra guards arrived early. Supervisors walked the tier. Phones rang in offices that were usually quiet. That's when people started whispering. Is it happening? Which one? Tonight? Those were the highs. Sudden, sharp, terrifying. An execution date had been set. The man wasn't Thomas. It was someone 3 cells down. His name was Michael Harris. Michael had been sentenced to death years ago for a brutal crime. He never denied what he did. He just said he was sorry. The night before his execution, the prison felt different. Too clean. Too organized. Michael was allowed a final visit. A final meal. A final walk down the tier. I watched from the office window as guards escorted him. He walked slowly. He didn't fight. Some inmates yelled. Some prayed. Some turned their backs. That night, I couldn't sleep. When the execution happened, I was in the chamber. Clerks never are. But everyone inside knew the moment it was over. The prison went quiet. That was the highest peak. The darkest moment. The next day, Michael's cell was empty. Just like that. Life continued. That's the part that stays with you. After the execution, death row felt colder. Thomas stopped reading. He sat on his bunk and stared at the floor. "You okay?" I asked him one afternoon. He looked up slowly. I saw the door open. I didn't understand. The door for him, Thomas said. One day it'll open for me too. That was a low moment. Heavy. Real. Days passed. Then weeks. Then something strange happened. Thomas was called to meet with officials. That didn't happen often. Death row inmates didn't get surprises. When he came back, his face was pale. "They moved my date," he said quietly. "Moved it." I asked. "Up," he replied. My stomach dropped. Thomas wasn't supposed to be next. His appeals were still pending. His name wasn't on any list I had seen. That night, I checked the files. Something didn't add up. A document was missing. Another was signed twice. A date had been changed. And Thomas Reed's name was suddenly where it shouldn't have been. Before I could ask anyone about it, the lights on death row dimmed. The guards started moving faster. And Thomas looked at me through bars and said, "I think they made a mistake." The next morning, Death row woke up early. Not because of noise, but because of tension. Guards walked the tier more often. Keys rattled. Radios crackled with short messages that stopped as soon as anyone listened too closely. Thomas Reed sat on his bunk, hands folded, eyes forward. He looked calm. That scared me. Did anyone explain the change? I asked him quietly as I passed his cell. Thomas shook his head. They just told me to get ready. Ready for what? I asked, even though I already knew. He looked at me for the end. That was a high moment, sharp and painful. I went back to the office and opened the files again. I checked names, dates, signatures. The mistake was still there. Someone had moved Thomas's execution date forward by months. That didn't just happen. I went to my supervisor, Mr. Collins. He was an older man who had worked at San Quentin longer than I had been alive. There's an error in the death row schedule, I said. He didn't look up. No, there isn't. Yes, there is, I insisted. Thomas Reed's date was changed without final approval. Mr. Collins finally looked at me. His eyes were tired. Daniel, he said, don't dig into things that aren't your job. But this is someone's life, I said. He lowered his voice. That's exactly why you should stop. That was a low moment. Cold. Final. I walked away shaking. Word spread fast on death row. Inmates whispered through vents. Guards avoided questions. Everyone knew something wasn't right. Thomas asked to see a lawyer. The request sat unanswered. He asked to make a phone call. Denied. That night, Thomas didn't sleep. Neither did I. At 3 a.m., the lights on the tier turned on fully. That never happened unless something big was coming. Thomas stood up when he heard the boots. How much time? He asked the guard. The guard didn't answer. Another guard opened the food slot and slid in a tray. Last meal? Thomas asked. Still no answer. That silence was worse than any words. The next day, outside the prison, protesters gathered. Some held signs. Some prayed. Some just stood there quietly. They didn't know Thomas's name. They just knew someone might die. Inside, Thomas finally got a meeting with a public defender. It lasted 10 minutes. When the lawyer walked away, Thomas looked defeated. They're trying to stop it, he told me, but they don't know if they can. Why would they rush it? I asked. Thomas looked at the floor. Because once something starts here, it's hard to stop. That night, an announcement echoed through the prison. Staff to positions. Everyone froze. Guards lined the hallway. Doors locked one by one. I watched as they approached Thomas's cell. He stood up slowly, smoothed his shirt, took one deep breath. Then a voice came over the radio. Hold. Everything stopped. The guards froze. One looked confused. Another voice followed. Execution postponed. Stand down. For a moment, no one moved. Then Thomas sat down hard on his bunk. His hands were shaking. So were mine. That was the extreme moment. Death had almost walked through the door. But it didn't. Not yet. Relief didn't last long. 2 hours later, Thomas was moved. Not back to his cell. To a different wing. Isolation. No explanation. No timeline. No answers. Before they closed the door, Thomas looked at me and said, "They don't like mistakes being noticed." That sentence stayed with me, because I knew he was right, and I knew something worse was coming. Isolation was quieter than death row. Too quiet. Thomas Reed sat alone in a small cell with white walls and no windows. The light stayed on all day and all night. Time lost its shape there. No books. No radio. No one to talk to. Just waiting. I tried to find him in the system. His name didn't show up on my screen. It was like he had been erased. That scared me more than the execution ever had. I asked the guard where Thomas was. He looked around and said, "You didn't see him?" That was the warning. Outside the prison, something had changed. The postponed execution made the news. Reporters asked questions. Lawyers filed motions. Protesters grew louder. Someone had noticed. Inside, the pressure was building. A week passed. Then 2. Thomas was still in isolation. Then one morning, I got called into Mr. Collins's office again. He didn't offer me a seat. You've caused trouble, he said. I followed the files, I replied. He sighed. San Quentin doesn't like attention. I didn't do this, I said. The system did. Mr. Collins looked at me for a long moment. Be careful. That was another low moment, quiet and threatening. 3 days later, Thomas was brought back to death row. He looked thinner, tired, older, but he was alive. They fixed the date, he told me. For now. For now? I asked. He nodded. Death row doesn't forget. Weeks passed. Appeals moved forward. The paperwork error became an official investigation. Someone had signed where they shouldn't have. A supervisor resigned. Another was reassigned. No one admitted fault, but the machine slowed down. That mattered. Then, late one night, an alarm sounded. Not loud, just once. I heard running, radios crackling, doors slamming. I rushed to the office window. Guards were at Thomas's cell. My heart dropped. They opened the door. Thomas didn't move. Medical arrived fast. Too fast. They said he had collapsed. They said it was his heart. They said he was pronounced dead minutes later. No execution. No chamber. Just a body on a bunk. That was the final high moment. The darkest one. The prison announced Thomas Reed's death the next morning. Natural causes. They said. I stood at my desk and stared at the wall. I knew better. Everyone on death row did. Thomas had survived 20 years, appeals, isolation, and a near execution. And then he died quietly out of sight. I quit San Quentin 3 months later. I couldn't carry it anymore. People ask me what death row is really like. I tell them this. It's not just about executions. It's about waiting, about mistakes, about dark cells where time stops. San Quentin is full of history, silence, and doors that close forever. Some men walk out, some don't, and some die without anyone ever knowing how close they came to surviving. That's what makes those cells the darkest of all.